Okay, thank you everyone for coming out. It's 3 o'clock. It's Thursday. I am part of the Atlanta Benefits Council of ASPA. There are 19 local councils across the U.S. David and Jeff James are also on here. They're on our board as well. And we are pretty excited because we've got real firepower. We've got Brian Graff and we've got Nevin Adams, the CEO and Chief Content Officer of the ARA. And our goal today is just to have casual conversation. So it's not going to be a PowerPoint slide. It's not going to be a deck. It's going to be some easy questions. I threw a couple of spicy ones in there for you guys, but I promise they're not too crazy. But really from there, I just want to put a quick pitch in for what we do as a local council. There are local councils across the country. We're here to do content, networking, and CE. So David is going to put some links out there for you. And the idea is if you like what you're seeing here, you've got a local council near you and you should take a look into it if you're not part of it. With that, I'm going to kick it off. So first question, I guess, is going to be pretty easy. Tell us a little bit about what you guys are doing. Like what makes the ARA important to everyone here and kind of the structure, because we're part of ASPA, there's NAPA, there's all these different groups. So I'll toss it up to either of you.
You want me to take this one? The American, for those who are not familiar, the American Retirement Association is an umbrella organization for now 5 different associations that are focused on retirement plans. Obviously ASPA, which I would assume most of the audience is familiar with, since this is an ASPA Benefits Council, which was the founding organization. And then kind of spun off of that was what is now ASEA, which is the American Society of Enrolled Actuaries. So the actuaries kind of spun themselves off because we all know actuaries want to be alone. And then NAPA, the National Association of Plan Advisors. I see a smattering of advisor types names that I'm familiar with here. And that was an organically grown organization, started kind of a subgroup within ASPA, and obviously has grown to be its own association. And actually in terms of membership is the largest one now. And then the most recent is Plan Sponsor Council of America, and also kind of joined us through a merger was the National Tax Deferred Savings Association. I see a few of those people scattered around here as well. And PSEA, of course, is the plan sponsor organization that we're kind of doing a reboot. It's an organization been around for over 70 years that, I think had faced some challenges from a membership standpoint. So we're kind of remaking it into more of an education organization and launched an actual plan sponsor credential the year before last, the Certified Plan Sponsor Professional designation, which has actually been really successful in a very short period of time. And then the NTSA, if you're not familiar with that, is the 4 through B space. So advisors and distributors that focus on in that kind of niche market. So, as the umbrella organization, we're, helping each of these organizations have conferences, have events like this one. And also, we've got an education team that helps with each of the credentialing programs. And then, the thing that obviously gets the most attention in terms of existing members is advocacy. And so it's all kind of jointly organized under the ARA umbrella. And we've got a complete advocacy team of folks, including yours truly, that spend a pretty sizable chunk of their time knocking on virtual doors in the building behind me, as well as in the administration, both on a legislative and regulatory front. And whenever there's a new administration, there's always a flurry of activity because every kind of new administration wants to hit the ground running and make their mark. And so this one's no different. And we've been pretty darn busy including some battles that we actually won, which we can get into if you want to.
That's exactly where I was going to segue to. Nevin joined us a couple of days ago. We were talking about some of the kind of big wins, because I think if anyone's here on LinkedIn, we see the content, we see things coming up, and when something's introduced, it's just a flurry. It feels like it's 1 minute it's out there, before you know it, there's 20 articles trying to parse through it and give you their take, and then suddenly it's either happening, not happening. So I'll kind of toss it up to you, Nevin, if you want to maybe talk a little about, we were talking about that, the kind of the wins that have been happening as far as advocacy, because I think that's near and dear to everyone on the call.
Well, the big one, the one that is most recent, and one that, ironically, given the sweeping impact, I mean, it's crazy to me. I've not been at this advocacy game as long as Brian has been, but it's just like completely ignored by the industry. And that was the freeze, the ceiling that was being put out there on the cost of living adjustments. And I have been in this business long enough to remember the last time that happened, which was 1986. And I was also in this business long enough to remember how long it took us to get those lifted, which was 2001. And to also appreciate the difference that kind of thing makes. I mean, people say, well, it doesn't happen for 10 years. There's plenty of time to fix it. You got at least one more administration between now and then. Basically, don't worry about it. But this kind of stuff, when it gets in there, it sticks, and people get used to it, and people get used to, I mean, it was done as a budget, a revenue raiser. It was clearly one of those budget games that gets played with retirement plans and retirement planning all the time. And, there was nothing for us in that, if you will, but I'll tell you that I was amazed at how quiet the rest of the retirement industry advocacy groups were on that issue. I think they're probably more worried maybe about the pension stuff, which, not insignificant, but it was a big deal. And I think it was a great win for us and for the efforts of Brian and the government affairs team to actually get that pulled out, because it was there in the House bill, and it was being considered in the Senate, and it, could easily have just ridden on in there with it. So keeping an eye on that kind of stuff all the time, raising the issue, negotiating that issue. I mean, that stuff, honestly, a lot of times we in the industry, we don't even see that going on, and we may not appreciate it. I'd like to think with our various media products that our members, we're all very aware of the issue, and we're chiming in and helping out. But it is a big deal, and something I think we as a group can be proud of.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. For sure. And I think more than anything else, it's that visibility. It's getting it where people can kind of see. So maybe that kind of tees up to, since you're Chief Content Officer, how are you, what's getting out to anyone affected in the plan industry? I think of advisors, I think of record keepers, I think of CPAs, but it's really everyone involved with plans. As content officer, what are you seeing as a way to kind of keep everyone ahead of the curve? Because I feel like as things come up, as things change, if you're not on LinkedIn every day, if you're not kind of scrolling through something, it's a blink if you missed it, and suddenly things will move forward. So in terms of content, and I'm just, kind of picking on you here because you're the content officer, what do you see as the best way for people to kind of stay ahead of the curve with everything that's going on, and how to, and especially in terms of how to address it with the participant, with the client, with the end user, really?
Well, the easy answer to that is to read any one of our member publications that come out on a variety of frequencies. I mean, that's the most obvious one. And we do have, we realize we've got different audiences who have different perspectives. We understand that a TPA might look at a plan design issue differently than an advisor might look at it, and in an altogether different light than, let's say, a plan sponsor might view it. And so we realize that at some level, as we put together the content and try to help it be meaningful and impactful for each of those various audiences, we try to keep that in mind. Now, the good news is the staff that's putting this together here, some of us like me have been in this business a long time, so that helps. But the other thing is, honestly, we got a great team sitting behind us. So there's nothing that makes me more nervous than trying to, in a 24-hour period or less, try to absorb a complicated legislative or regulatory proposal and share that out with the ASPA audience. Why? Because there are some stone cold experts out there. And if you screw it up, and it's easy to screw some of this stuff up, they've you hear about it, and nobody wants to be a screw up in front of, several thousand, 10,000, 20,000 people. So the great news is I've got folks on the government affairs team sort of behind me, and I can say, hey, would you look at this before we put this up? And they saved my bacon more times than I want to admit, and made me look very smart in the result, because you put it out there and my name's on it. And when there have been a couple of times where they so completely had to redo what I did, I put their name on it too. But it's just nice to have that backstop. Although honestly, the backstop that just comes from the audience itself, the membership itself. And they help us find things that are important and are germane in the questions that they have. And so it sort of circulates like that. But what we try to do is take all that and curate it down to a finite number. We work pretty much with 4 stories an issue, and we try to lift out the things that are really important, and not waste people's time with a lot of news items that will be distracting, because we know everybody's busy and everybody's got a lot going on. So I think curation plus that expertise, looking over our shoulders and knowing that you all will be looking over our shoulders, really helps.
Excellent. Excellent. I'm going to take a moment on, Brian, you mentioned something a little bit earlier about virtually knocking on doors, and that's kind of where we are right now. So I can only imagine the challenge of getting in line to have advocacy around different things happening on Capitol Hill while not being able to actually knock on a door. But I don't even know how you invite a senator to a Zoom meeting. I imagine it had to be kind of pretty wild. But in that light, maybe, and this is both open to both of you, so I'd love to hear both of your take on it. But as we are starting to at least get traction towards vaccination, towards kind of getting a handle on this, how are you seeing, and I guess I'll make it a 2-part question. Part 1 being, how are you seeing the return, what we get back, how we get back to more open, events? And then I guess, do you see it as like a permanent sea change? Like, is this going to be part hybrid, part not? Or do you think I don't think it's going to be business as usual personally, like the way it was previously. So I guess the question is, where do you see that kind of going?
So Kevin, you're talking about like conferences, right? And like conferences and events like that.
Anything, conferences, meetings, advocacy, anything in this. It's open.
So
you take it where you want to go.
So, right now, as you probably can guess, given the myriad of events that we do as an organization each year, that we spend quite a bit of time talking about this. And a lot of it, unfortunately, is like pretty much everything around these days in this country, it's political, right? I mean, name one thing that's not political going on, and it varies from state to state. So, Florida's wide open, Texas is wide open, Maryland is not open, DC is 25% open. Vegas will be wide open. So, for example, the Napa 401k summit, which we moved to September, is a go. And, we're pretty excited about that. I do think over time, it's going to get better. We hope. Right now, one of the things, Napa does a fly-in in the summer that we're kind of leaning towards trying to do, but we're trying to get approval from the city and working with the hotel and all that stuff, and trying to understand what the ramifications are in terms of, will there be distancing required in the general sessions and stuff like that. And again, it's very specific to the locale, which is, to be honest with you, super annoying. But we have to deal with it. So, that's, and it does tie into the engagement on the Hill, because, I'm got some dinners coming up with Republican senators, but the Democrats, of course, are not. I mean, there's a few Democrats that are doing in-person meetings, but, as you would probably guess, it's right now seemingly along party lines. and that's kind of par for the course in DC. As I started with, everything is kind of political. So, we're pushing. Our hope is that all of our conferences this fall will happen. I have no reason to think that they won't. I certainly know the Vegas one will, and pretty optimistic ASPA annual will as well, because that's unfortunately later in October, as well as a few other conferences that some of the organizations are doing. And then, hopefully going into next year, we'll be in a much better place. I do think that you will find that depending on the audience, you're right that there will be kind of some of it will be status quo and some of it will have to change. I think for some of our larger events, we'll probably be offering them some kind of hybrid option, or a virtual option, frankly, for those people that just don't want to go and just want to attend some of the sessions virtually. But I do think that for certain events, the networking that you get can't be duplicated in any way, shape, or form virtually. And so I do, I'm not one who thinks that this is the end of the conference era by any stretch of the imagination. Quite the contrary. At least so far with registration for NAPA, there's a lot of enthusiasm about getting out and going to an organization event. I mean, our registration numbers are fantastic so far. So, I do think people realize that the networking, particularly, as well as other things, can't obviously be done virtually. I think CE, on the other hand, if the value proposition is only CE, I think that's a bit of a challenge. And one of the things that we've been talking to the ABCs about is de-emphasizing the CE, because frankly, CE for a lot of folks is pretty ubiquitous in terms of its availability, and making it more about networking and socializing, and other things, maybe professional enhancement, rather than kind of core CE stuff that has been traditionally the case. I think, I think there's things that you get out of a conference session that you can't get from a virtual CE, because you can interact with your peers and kind of discuss things as things are coming up. And I think there's value in that. But if it's just about CE, it's going to be more of a challenge. And that's why we try to make our events more than that.
Absolutely. Nevin, do you want to tack on a little thought process around that?
Well, it'd be hard to add on to kind of what Brian's been talking about. I think, last year we all learned to do things a little differently. And I think, certainly I know with us in the events we were doing, learning to do things in a virtual world was kind of a different experience. I think last year everybody sort of expected it. And to Brian's point, I think as we go into this year, I think we're still trying to negotiate through that, realizing that people are going to feel differently about getting out and engaging. Organizations that have to sponsor those events are going to be different about how they want their people out and engaging and things like that. So we're, again, this year certainly trying to, I think, accommodate that as much as we can. But we have learned some interesting things along the way, and this is the kind of thing that I'm hearing from our members all the time. But I'll give you an example. In the ASPA virtual conference that we did last fall, for instance, so it was all virtual and is what it was, but the interactions in the chat rooms that were associated with those virtual sessions were so engaging. I mean, for a virtual environment, by that point in time, people had really learned, and I think you had a level of interactivity between the attendees focused on what was being said in the session, but the kind of interaction there that you wouldn't normally get in a live event. You wouldn't want to miss something, or I don't know, the person you might be engaging with is on the other side of the room and you couldn't do it with them. But you had plenty of people saying, commenting on this and responding to the comments on that and things like that. And I think, that sort of virtual element, I mean, we talk about having to do something hybrid, and that's fine, but But I think there's an element that might even come out of this that will enhance even our live events. And so I think as many people have learned in their practices, I think we're all having the opportunity, if we think about it, yeah, everybody wants to get back to normal, whatever normal is, but to take forward some of the things that we've learned in this environment as a way to enhance whatever normal was and make that better as well. So I think we've got a lot of interesting times ahead of us.
We'll see how, obviously time will tell. For those of you might remember in 2008, we had that little crisis. Everyone said corporate travel's over. No one's ever going to go anywhere, and conferences are dead. And, in that year they were bad, but, a couple of years later, things were back to normal. So, I have a lot more optimism around the desire of people to get out of their offices and houses and meet their friends.
Caves is the word, right? Get out of our caves.
Right. Whatever we're in right now. Exactly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And speaking of, for everyone on the Zoom right now, we do want to have some participation in the chat box, which has been mostly David. So if you have questions, because I have more things I'm going to ask, but if you have questions, I want this to be an interactive, open kind of session. I'm not the only one asking questions. We want to hear kind of the things that you'd like to openly just have a little discussion around. And while y'all are doing that, I got a little bit of a pivot for you. I'd say the last calendar year, if there was a undertone to a lot of what's changed, it's been a focus on both diversity, both from equity, from inclusion, and kind of looking at how is this industry structured? How are we working to kind of get more people around the campfire when it comes to being a part of the process, both from the top, from leadership down to the advisor who's just getting started on qualified plans, and how to make that kind of something reflective of society, maybe a little different than I could wax about when I started at Morgan Stanley. And I was interestingly unique in that office in Alpharetta, Georgia. Let's just put it that way. So with that being said, I'll open up to either of you. Kind of where do you see that both as from the ARA, from the different organizations, and kind of directionally where you are focusing to kind of address and work around that?
So I think we've got, we're trying to address it in several ways. And, a big part of it, frankly, obviously we can't make, I don't want to pick on Morgan Stanley, but you mentioned that we can't make Morgan Stanley.
Probably should have named them directly. That's just where I started.
So, we can't make our members do stuff, right? We can certainly, we're devoting a lot of time at conferences. I believe there's going to be I know there's going to be a session at ASPA Annual on this, and I know for sure there's going to be a general session at Napa Summit on D&I. And so, I think what we're trying to do is just, help facilitate conversations. And then obviously from an organizational standpoint, we are taking action in terms of our leadership structures to specifically recruit and help facilitate a more diverse and inclusive board among all the different organizations. And you see that with the fact that Pat Wenzel, who's a Latina woman from Texas, is the president of NAPA. ASPA is doing similar things. NTSA's president is Darlene Flagg, is a Black woman from Texas as well. And so I think those are the kinds of leadership actions that the organization can take to show our commitment to this area. By showing by example, Kevin, to be frank with you. And so, I'm proud of the work that we've done. I think we've got more work to do. And then the other thing that we're doing, frankly, because again, you have these topics of what what you can do. And I always try to do things that we can, I don't want to do things that we can't do. And I, it would be great to create more minority advisors, for example, right? I mean, I think that's, people talk about that all the time, but I don't think ARA is really in a position to effectuate that in any meaningful way, other than by demonstrating by example why it's important. On the other hand, what we can do, and what we have a committee doing, is trying to speak to that audience more effectively in terms of why a retirement plan is important for their business and their employees. There's a lot of minority-owned businesses in this country, smaller businesses, and a lot of them unfortunately don't have a plan. And to be frank with you, and Nevin articulates this well as well, when when the marketing materials are a couple of white people on a yacht, it's just not working, right? This, we don't really have good messaging for the diverse audience that exists in this country in terms of the value proposition of retirement savings. And so what this group of leaders is trying to do is help to refine, in a more, global way, not any particular product per se, ways to sort of communicate, working with various minority chambers of commerce in different states, ways to better communicate why plans are an important part of the benefit structure that you should be providing, and in a language that they'll recognize and appreciate. Because frankly, there's, we've got, I mean, I don't know how deep you want me to get into this, but it's obvious that we spend a lot of time talking about it.
Absolutely.
Is, there's a lot of mistrust of the banking system in that community. And there's a significant number of the I mean, this is something I've been on some panels about, is the challenge of the fact that, 20% of our country is unbanked. So, there's a systemic challenge, and, and then the third thing that we're doing is we're working on a pretty exciting legislative proposal that, the data that Nevin's been helping put together demonstrates how powerfully this could impact the retirement savings prospects of people of color. And so, I think, to answer your question, Kevin, it's threefold. It's example, it's coming up with better messaging, and it's policy driven, that we want policies that are going to improve and make racial, make both racial and gender equality an important priority from a retirement policy perspective.
Absolutely. I think if you think about it from what you just said, if you've got more people succeeding in that, if they're getting better retirement outcomes, that's the next generation of people who want to be involved in the business. If you don't see it working for you, it's not as likely you're going to want to pick up that and go with that direction and get into this part of the world. Nevin, I don't want to leave you out. I know
the sad thing is when a group of old white guys get together and a group of old white guys and look around and everybody looks like them, nothing looks weird. The description that you said, Kevin, I think the thing that's hard for people a lot of times is to be in those shoes, to literally feel that way. And if you've had the opportunity, as I've had, you pretty much have to seek it out, where you find yourself where you are that unusual person in the room kind of thing. It's the first time you really get an appreciation for what that feels like every day for individuals in our profession. I know, some of the things that we've been able to do, like in recognizing women on the advisor space and things like that, and we've helped sort of highlight with our list and things, the top women advisors. And I've heard from any number of them, they were the only woman in their office, to what you said, and they felt all alone and they felt different and all that kind of stuff. And then they see this list of like 400 women advisors in our nation, and they're like, wow, I'm not the only one. And then they see somebody, they know where they are, they can reach out to them, they make the contact. I remember the comment a couple of years ago from Jania Stout, who was the president of NAPA at the time, and she said she knew we turned a corner in the advisor industry when she went to the 401k summit and had to stand in line in the bathroom to get into the bathroom kind of thing. It's some of this is a slow process, but it really is important. And as Brian says, the statistics out there, the coverage gap that we spent a lot of time talking about and articulating and trying to do something about. I mean, particularly if you look at what's happened with COVID and the disparate impacts economically, the industries that have been taken out. In a lot of cases, if you had a retirement plan going into COVID, you did okay. You're much more likely, because you're the industry you're in, to sort of keep your job. Your retirement plan took a dip, but then came back nicely, kind of thing. But a whole lot of the people that we're talking about here, they didn't have a retirement plan to begin with, and they lost their jobs. And they're going to be slow on the comeback. And so, you know, when you talk about the impact that COVID has had on retirement, I think it very much is one of those things where, as we go into this, not only this next year, but the years ahead, we'll want to be doing things to sort of help people who weren't able to ride out that cushion be able to have the same opportunity.
Definitely. That's great. And it actually leads into kind of what's happening on the Hill a little bit. So we'll kind of pivot back to more advocacy, but really I've seen, so I'm looking at the chat and I've seen 1, 2, 3, 4 people asking about Secure Act 2.0, which could provide an opportunity to, in fact, maybe help things along. So
let me get to the Secure 2.0 thing.
Okay.
You know, a lot of it's going to depend on the process, because, you know, right now we passed this first bill, the COVID relief bill, by reconciliation. And I think everyone in the country learned a little bit about how the reconciliation process works. We probably need a new Schoolhouse Rock video for the reconciliation process.
That's what I was about to say. That's the last time I really had been up to date.
Because it doesn't work the same. There's no committee. It just goes, you know. Anyway, so you know, that is the question. And the parliamentarian Elizabeth McDonough, very smart lady, she has agreed to allow for 2 more bills potentially through reconciliation. And what we don't know, based on a op-ed that was published in the Washington Post last night by Senator Manchin, is whether he basically said he will not vote to change the filibuster, and he kind of squashed any thoughts around that. The second thing he implied was less clear, was that he might not be comfortable doing any more reconciliation bills. So really why I'm saying this is that if they do reconciliation bills, there's less enthusiasm for Secure 2.0 and more enthusiasm for much bigger ideas. Bigger ideas like Richie Neal's been discussing, a national requirement that every employer with 10 employees should have to have some type of payroll savings arrangement, whether it's a 401k or a 403b or a payroll deduction IRA, or and taking and Senator Wyden's idea. And by the way, Richie Neal is the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, and Senator Wyden from Oregon is the chairman of the Finance Committee, taking the current law savers credit and basically throwing it out and reforming it as a matching program. And what I mean by that is a government match on top of, if your employer provides an existing match, that's deposited into the 401k, 403b, or IRA of the saver. Yeah. I'm not making this up. Wow. And they're very seriously, and by the way, that proposal would apply to anybody, not everybody, but based on your income, would apply to folks who are, part of existing plans, including public sector workers. So like for teachers, it would be amazing, because those folks don't get matches, and now they would get effectively a match from the government. And it would be up to 50% up on $2,000 of savings each year. So, for that audience, saving $2,000 or $3,000 is probably pretty common. Up to 2,000 of it would get a 50% match.
So kind of the idea of that saver's credit, but instead of it being on their return, going literally directly.
Well, they would declare it on their return, but the money wouldn't really be a tax credit. It would really be essentially, my eligibility for this government match would be dependent on my income, and so I would fill out a form, and then the government would send the money to the account.
Wow, that's
it's a big deal.
That's a lot.
And so between the two of these, I mean, these are big ideas. I mean, I don't want to pick on Secure 2.0, but changing the as much as we would like to see the required beginning date change from 72 to 75. Okay, we're talking these ideas are 50 million new people into the retirement system, trillions of dollars of new savings. These are big ideas. So that's why, I don't want to poo-poo 2.0. I just want to say it's going to get a lot, depending on the way they do things, it's just not going to get the same level of focus. And maybe there will be a few items that get included. Now, that doesn't mean they're not going to reintroduce the bill. We had a call with Ways and Means staff, both Richie Neal's staff and Kevin Brady's staff, Monday, it was Monday. And so, they are working on it, and they will reintroduce the bill, but whether it gets much action is going to depend on the environment. Right now, bipartisan bills aren't really getting much attention, in case you haven't noticed. So that could change. They may be forced to, Manchin and Kristen Sinema from Arizona may force their hand and require Democrats to work with Republicans. In that case, Secure 2.0 has an environment that it could thrive in. But whether they go big or go small with 2.0 is gonna depend on how the next 6 months goes. And there's certainly a lot of good things in that bill. I know there's things that a lot of people care about. CITs for 403Bs is a very popular one. Expanding pooled employer plans to include 403Bs is something that I think actually probably would get in no matter what, because if there's a requirement for employers to have a plan, there's a lot of employers that would like a 403B to participate in a 403B PEP, particularly nonprofits, if they have to have a plan. And by the way, another thing that's kind of cool about this proposal that we were able to convince, I think we've been able to convince them on, is to include in the PEP to allow for a new, not just a PEP, but it'll probably be used with a PEP, a new 401k safe harbor. That is a deferral only 401k, no testing, no testing, no top heavy, nothing. And it's deferral only with either the same limit as the IRA limit, or maybe a little bit more, like an $8,000 limit. And what's neat about that is, just imagine a world where you've got all these employers that have to have a plan now, and you could use a PEP and do this, super simple 401k safe harbor. That's actually really simple as opposed to simple. And, it would be a great product to get on the street for advisors to offer to, or anybody to offer to these small businesses, because it's, a pretty simple way of complying with the requirement, and presumably through a PEP at pretty low cost. So, listen, I've been doing this stuff for a long time, and those of you who know me know that it's been frustrating to me that this coverage gap, the systemic coverage gap that's been around, 45-ish% for the last 40 years is frustrating. There's a lot of people in this country who don't have access to a plan, and we know that when they don't have access to a plan, they're significantly less likely to save for retirement. But when they have a plan at work, it works. So if we can through these ideas, move the needle and really jump that number from, 55% coverage to 75, 80% coverage. That's huge. And, is impacting the lives of, tens of millions of people. And as I alluded to before, and Nevin's done some great work in this area, really has a huge impact among people of color and women who are single. And so, that's why I don't want to necessarily pour water on Secure 2.0. I just want to emphasize that they're thinking bigger things right now.
Okay. Well, in terms of bigger things, because you mentioned, 50 million people may be entering the retirement plan space if they were to have mandates. Let's pivot for a second. There's a few states that have already, and I really can tell you, I don't know a ton about it, but there's a few states that have already experimented with state-run plans. Are there, one of the questions is asking about, could that ever go federal? Could that be a thing, instead of a mandate?
That's what I'm talking about.
Okay.
That is exactly what I'm saying.
Okay, so you going full federal. Okay.
That's this proposal that would require every employer in the country that with 10 employees to have a plan.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. That's probably bigger than the original Secure. That's big.
Yeah, just a little.
Just a touch. Nevin, let's get your, where do you see that? Like, if you had to look at this, if you said, where do you want to see it go? Where is it going? What will be kind of what will be your take? What will be your hot take?
Well, to Brian's point, I think coverage is kind of the big issue. And so from that standpoint, the way I've always looked at it is anything that moves that needle up is something that ought to be considered and explored kind of thing. So, and I think one of the things, obviously that we've always stood in for and lobbied for is that if you're going to set up like one of the state-run programs, you're going to have a state mandate that people are going to offer a plan. Okay, fine, but let's always allow for the fact that a private sector, ERISA qualified retirement plan satisfies that mandate. In other words, don't force people to either have an ERISA plan and something else or something else because maybe at the state level you've got some other version of what it ought to be covered other than ERISA standards. Basically let that ERISA plan satisfy the mandate, and if you do that, then anything the state-run plans add to the mix is an addition to the mix and is a good thing. And to Brian's point, I mean, you all know what happens. I mean, people they know they need to save for retirement, but they don't do it and they don't know how. Arguably at the small end of the market, as employers are thinking about other things than offering a plan. And if they stop long enough to think about offering a plan, they might not know how to go about doing it. That's why we say that, small plans are sold and not bought kind of thing, because there is that kind of issue. So in that sense, and particularly if you look at where that coverage gap is and the type of employers that are outside of that coverage gap, things like a mandate, I mean, maybe that's what it takes to get people off of the needle. We know, at least anecdotally, and some of the folks in this call have shared this with me, is the idea is that when you've got the state-run plan and it has a mandate, all of a sudden an employer who might not have even not just been thinking about other things other than a mandate kind of or a retirement plan, all of a sudden becomes receptive to that message about having what I will pejoratively call a real retirement plan. Something that really sort of takes advantage of all the benefits, that allows some benefit to the owner who's setting it up, that maybe has a match and things along those lines. So it opens a door. And because ultimately, I'll tell you, the closer I get to retirement, the more I'm concerned personally that I, who have made sacrifices and done the right things and, all this kind of stuff over time, will suddenly find myself at the end of my retirement road with my taxes all risen up to take care of the people who, for whatever reason, didn't do the same things I did. So selfishly, even aside from the great love that I have for the system and the positive benefits that I've seen it have, there's a selfish thing that says, everybody, if we're all in the shape that Nevin Adams is in, then we'll all are going to have a better retirement.
That must be that green drink you're drinking. I saw that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to show everyone your Iron Man drink. He's drinking
looks,
that Iron Man smoothie that
it looks healthy, but it's really not.
it's in a mason jar. I'm going to give that one to you.
Yeah, well, souvenirs. Besides, guys, I'm tired of listening to what Teresa Ghilarducci has dishing on our system. We need.
So let me amplify a couple of things that come up in regard to this proposal. So, several things. One, I'm kind of scrolling through these questions. The way they're structuring it, they're going to take the current law startup credit, which is, as you know, 50% up to $5,000, and they're going to make it 100% up to $5,000 for companies with 25 employees or less. So basically, it's whatever cost the employer is going to incur, they're going to get a tax credit for it. And again, 100%. Second, there's no employer contributions required at all. So, one would hope that whatever the cost is for operating one of these things is going to be pretty minimal, because the requirement to have a plan does not require you to have an employer contribution, which is why they came up, they agreed to do the safe harbor idea. So that there's a product that people can provide that doesn't require testing or require any employer contributions. So, and it's also phased in over several years. I think, if it were enacted this year, for large employers, it wouldn't apply. Employers with 100 lives or less, 100 lives or more, it would apply in 23, and then I think it's 25 for smaller. So there's a pretty decent amount of ramp up time for the industry to kind of get its act together and create product for all these new employers. I know there's people that, I know people are, the M word's kind of a big bad word in this country. I've kind of resolved myself to the fact that if we give employers essentially a reimbursement for any out-of-pocket costs and there's no employer contributions, offering a payroll slot is really not a big ask, given all the other employer requirements that we impose on folks, unemployment, workers' comp, et cetera, et cetera. And so, given the value proposition to the employees of having the opportunity to save at work, when the data is so compelling that employees are 12 times more likely to save for retirement when they're covered by a workplace plan than when they're on their own in an IRA, you kind of put all that together, and I think the benefits outweigh the costs, particularly given the fact that the costs are really not economic costs. I don't want to minimize that for a small employer that there's some time going to be spent on this, but hopefully with enough product out there, it will be a pretty minimal amount of time. And there's already, for those of you who, well, I recognize some of you like payroll companies and some of you don't. We're Switzerland, so we kind of stay out of the fray, but there are already some companies that are already offering payroll deduction IRA products to satisfy these mandates. And so I would expect, as this becomes a national requirement, that there'll be more of you that are offering these types of programs.
Very good. Very good. I got an interesting one on here that came out on the chat list asking about 403B plans that are non-ERISA. So the actual question is about K through 12 403B plans becoming ERISA. And I'll throw a little extra in there for you. That's the question. I guess it's a question generally around non-ERISA, maybe looking at how that's being done versus ERISA. And I'll give a little side note of my own experience is the state of Pennsylvania actually passed a bunch of legislation that almost essentially attached ERISA's rules to their non-ERISA plans. And that was a couple of years back. So some states have actually addressed it at that level. So that might be too technical for this forum, but if you think about ERISA versus non-ERISA and you want to,
well, I mean, government plans are exempt from ERISA, and I don't think there's any appetite in Congress to change that rule. So, I mean, I mean, I do recognize that some states are thinking about, imposing certain types of sort of fiduciary responsibilities from time to time, but generally they get kind of beat down because the schools don't want those I mean, the school administrators get very up in arms when someone's putting fiduciary responsibilities on them. And they're pretty powerful lobbying group. So my general experience is those kinds of ideas kind of get, put aside. I think the real, if I understand the question, which comes up all the time, and I'll get on my 403B soapbox in short order, is the idea that why can't, non-ERISA 403B plans look more like ERISA plans? That's sort of the kind of thing I get. And, there's a lot of history here. But I think the biggest reason, and I have personal experience, as some of you know this story, because I am the son of 2 public school teachers. And the reality is that when you are working for a great private company, whether it's small or big, that decides to do retirement benefits, they have a vested interest in that plan. There's a lot of them have HR folks who are dedicated to those plans. A lot of them, because of non-discrimination rules, have matching programs. They hopefully employ, good advisors and TPAs and other providers to help teach their employees about the importance of saving. A lot of the stuff that a lot of our members do really, really well. Well, school teachers don't get any of that. They get Zippo. They get nada. My parents didn't get 1 ounce of support to decide whether or not it made even any sense to save until somebody came to our house when I was 11 years old and came to our kitchen table, and my father dragged me out of my room when I was playing Atari, and I was very mad about that. And this is a true story.
What game? Tell us which game then. If it was
what game? It was Pong, for God's sake.
Was it Pong? It could have been Pac-Man. Could have been Space Invaders.
It was that big yellow box.
Clearly, the scars run deep.
And so I was an expert at Pong. Anyway, so and I sat down and listen, I'm not going to say that this person, whatever, what my parents bought was the best price product in the universe, because it wasn't. But you know what? They saved, and they wouldn't have saved unless this person, came to the house every 6 months to talk to them about the importance of saving. And there's a value to that we sort of forget. And unfortunately, in the environment of a lot of public sector workers, they don't have the kind of support that the private sector has, which is why that industry grew up the way it did. And, I think, this is one of the things that frustrates me about, a lot of perceptions in our industry is that people seem to think that there's a one size fits all for everything. And our economy and our country and our culture is so diverse that we need to recognize that we need to be adaptive and provide the kinds of programs that best fit particular audiences. And the data has shown consistently that teachers save more when they have the access to an advisor. And if we go to a personal advisor, and if we go to an ERISA model, most ERISA plans don't offer participant advice. And so, these are things that need to be thought about before we sort of jump to conclusions about whether ERISA in that context makes a lot of sense. I don't know if someone's disagreeing with me.
Someone needs to go on mute is what that is. David, if you don't mind. There we go. Perfect. That's a great answer. That is that's a perspective I think a lot of us,
it's a very personal one to me.
It absolutely.
And I think, so one of the things that, I've worked very close, and I see some of the NATSA folks on this Zoom thing, we worked really hard to improve transparency And that industry has gotten infinitely better from a transparency standpoint. And as a result, fees have gone substantially down to where they were certainly when my parents were involved. And that's a good thing. Is there more better work that we need to do? Absolutely. But I think, again, assuming that one size fits solutions for everybody is the thing that can be really a dangerous way of thinking.
It's a great answer. And I think that's one of those ones that it's easy to forget how different the demographics are across the industry. That side started with the tax sheltered annuities. I mean, that's just a different world than the trust case side, even to the fact that we still have investments that are different in the two different worlds. So great perspective. Nevin, you got anything you want to add? Any thoughts?
That's too good a story to mess with.
Absolutely. I've got one interesting here for you. And Brian, I know you're heading up on your time. Nevin's going to be hanging out here for a little bit with us. So by the way, everyone, if you've got questions and we want to hear them, we'll get a good answer. What are your thoughts on the retirement plan industry? And do you think it can accommodate a growing gig economy, or I guess more part-time or people kind of in the industry, but not career retirement plan folks?
So, I mean, there's a lot of conversation, there's two things sort of in the broader policy arena that we're spending a lot of time talking to folks on the Hill about, beyond the thing I've already talked about, the requirement to have a plan. One is emergency savings. A lot of conversation around the fact that there's, genuine concern, particularly given the crisis that we've all faced as a country over the last 18 months, or however long it's been, that a lot of families didn't have any savings at all. And then the other is, the fact that more and more people are transitioning to gig employment, either partially or fully, and that provides, results in a benefits gap. And so, I think part of what the thinking is behind some of these ideas, particularly the savers match idea, is that, if you're a gig worker, I can, open an IRA account, I can save $2,000, get a deduction, and the government's going to kick in $1,000. And so in a way, it creates a personal retirement plan for that audience. And I think, there's a lot of interest in trying to do that. Some other ideas that have been talked about, leveraging pooled employer plans in some way. And then the same on the emergency savings side, a lot of thinking is going on right now about how can we piggyback on retirement plans, create sidecar accounts. It's a challenge. Or is it merely just, making hardship distributions a little bit easier, but a little bit more limited? There's this kind of push-pull because you got the leakage concern, which I know everyone here cares about as much as we do. But there's also the real issue of a fairly sizable percentage of the population that has very minimal savings. And so, these are all kind of broader macro savings issues that are getting a lot of attention right now. And gig workers are definitely in the mix because they're obviously an increasing percentage of the employed population.
Definitely. That's good. I know you're coming up on your time, Brian, so I don't want to hold you over. Nevin, we're going to hit you with a question that JD asked. So it's a good one. It's good.
I'll let you take that one, Nevin. Thank you.
Brian, thank you so much for being on. Yes, thank you. We really appreciate it. Everyone, Brian, thank you.
Appreciate it, Kevin. Thank you.
All right, Nevin, we're going to hit you with a couple of questions.
All right.
So here's what we're going to hit you with.
As long as it's not, what do you really think about Brian Graff? Okay. Just.
Oh, he just got off. It's not being recorded, so you can say what. Yeah, I guess that was for Brian, but unfortunately, there we go. Oh, here's another really good one. So I'm gonna start with this one. So, and this is near to, I think, a lot of us, is that, Facebook just had a half a billion people have their data breached. And if anyone's seen a bunch of text messages come in the last week, you can fairly guess why. I think I've had 20 packages that have been redirected, and click here. So the questions around data and kind of, can data be used almost as a revenue point? So in other words, can a record keeper, or the question is, will plan data become the new commodity versus charging for a plan, saying, the plan's free, but we have access to these data points that we can use. So why don't you give that one a kick?
Well, you don't have to be a genius to kind of see that's kind of where things are going. It's clear in this internet age, and we all know, the data mining that's going on. The ads that are pitched at you. You go from one site to the other, and all of a sudden, like what you were looking at over here, and now you got an ad for here. And it's really creepy stuff. But it's one of those things, obviously, that we're getting. It's why some things are free. They're not really free. They're free because you're trading in something of yourself for that. Now, in theory, that all improves the service level and gives you, some benefit from that. But it is an issue. One of we've had a court case come down this week, the question of whether participant data is a plan asset or not. The rulings so far have all been pretty much in that it's not a plan asset per se. But you could see out there somewhere somebody deciding, a judge who perhaps wasn't schooled in ERISA, saying, you know what, I think maybe, it is. So yes, I think there's certainly value. We all know that participant data is valuable, and we all know that people could find things to do with that participant data. And the thing that I'm sure JD is thinking about, because I hate to say, I would never say I know how JD thinks, but I'm going to presume for a second that I kind of have an angle of where he's going. And the reality is that there are firms out there today that don't have anything to do with our business per se, but are in the business of consumer data, consumer marketing, consumer pitching. And it would be, this would be a great place for somebody like that, given the breadth and depth of data that is available to a record keeper about individuals that is routinely given over. They could certainly do a lot with that. And hey, if you were a participant in a plan, or if you were a plan sponsor, and you could basically consider giving more value to your participants by virtue of this kind of partnership or something like that, I mean, why would you not at least put it on the table? I don't think today. I think we've got a lot of privacy concerns today, but I know my kids are less worried about this stuff than I am, and my guess is their kids will be even less worried about it because it's so ubiquitous. So we will see.
And it's kind of a two-edged sword, because one side, you appreciate when they have that data dialed in on you sometimes, and it makes life easier when it says, hey, we know you're going to go to this particular location of the grocery store in your map, and you don't have to tell it exactly. On the flip side, again, like you said, I mean, I work for Record Keeper. We have a lot of data on a participant, and some of it we hopefully want to use to make their experience better and dial in a more custom experience. But in my head, I see a place saying, like to JD's point, your record keeping's free. We won't charge you a penny to record keep your plan if everyone downloads the app.
I was a record keeper back in the day when certain mutual fund companies were giving away record keeping for free. And it was really hard for me to compete against free. And we all know it wasn't free. It was paid for in different ways. But free is a very compelling sales point. So we'll see.
And people still bite on it. They still don't question what free sounds great. And I'm like, no one shows up to your office in a suit for free, but I digress. Here's a good one. And in the interest of time, I know we're going to ask a few more, but we don't want to hold everyone over. I know we had it planned out for a block of time, but again, want to make sure we're not, everyone's got things they want to get back to.
I've still got green drink, so we're
still got green drink, a very colorful green drink. Let's get your feel on PEPs. And the question is about DOL final ruling, conflicts of interest, prohibited transactions. pool provider as a 338, but let's just get your thought on PEPs as a all things PEPs.
We've seen a lot about PEPs. You're going to keep seeing a lot about PEPs. I think it's early days. I think there are a lot of questions still about PEPs. I think we're on record. We're pressing for some clarification around some of those issues to try and get some sort of clarity around it. So yeah, there's still a lot of questions, but there's clearly a lot of people coming to market. And a lot of, I mean, trust me, before this year's out, there'll be a lot more who will have come to market. And there are already services out there to help you pick between PEPs and things like that. So yeah, we're going to have a whole new sidecar industry, if you will. There are many different perspectives on what impact PEPs are going to have. Nevin's got a personal perspective, and that is that it will have an impact, but probably not on the order of what the biggest proponents think it will. But I'll go back to the comment I said earlier. I do think that PEPs can be additive to solving the coverage gap, just like the state-run plans. And you can certainly argue that, as some of the folks on this chat room have and will, that you don't need a PEP. You can do everything you want to do with a PEP. You can do, and maybe you do better with a single standalone plan. Fine, I don't buy that at all. But I do think that the structure of PEPs will grab up some of the people out there who don't currently have a plan. I think it will make it more cost effective for providers to offer those services to a market that otherwise they'd lose money on for 3 years, and therefore they'll be more inclined to do it. And so, I look at this and it's like, I don't know exactly how much difference it's going to make, but I think on the one hand, it has to be a positive difference in coverage. And I think that's a big deal. And if in the meantime, the existence of a PEP opens that door to a standalone plan conversation, well, what's wrong with that? I think it's an opportunity for people to differentiate the services they're delivering standalone versus a PEP, and vice versa. It's market competition. I'm good with that, long as it helps coverage.
I think that's a great answer. I think, again,
JD will never speak to me again, but that's okay.
No, you can go on his call tonight and you can get in his chat bar and you can harass him. So I see that, JD, that puke emoji. So if you have any final kind of thoughts, like I want to just say a few things about, just making sure everyone understands what the ASPA councils do, and again, what the local councils do. But any last kind of thoughts, especially maybe around content, around things that you do that you think are on the forefront, or just really anything you want to chat on?
Wow, that's an open door.
Right?
Look, I mean, seriously, you all that are on this call, all of the members of ASPA, NAPA, NATSA, PSCA, ASEA, we're an amazing community. We're all, sometimes we pull on their oars in slightly different speeds and things like that. Sometimes some of us pull harder than others and the boats go in circles a little bit. But it's amazing to me, this community, and the interaction and the support this community has, and the impact that we make in terms of America having a better retirement, and just the positive things that come out of that every day. It's just amazing. I feel really honored and privileged to have sort of fallen into this business and had the opportunity to see a lot of different things over time. I feel really honored and fortunate to be a part of an organization like the ARA that is not only in the business of trying to help people, but actually to advocate for strong, positive, impactful change. I mean, even the kinds of things that Brian was alluding to before that screwed up the last 2 of my weekends, if you will. When you know that that's going in pursuit of a cause like this, and really sort of helping make a positive difference for Americans to have a great retirement. I mean, how lucky are we, all of us, to be part of that? So I appreciate everything that everybody on this call does, and will continue to do. I hope we help in some small or large way in terms of all the various things that we do. I'd love to hear from you all at any time. You help us know what's important. You also help us make change, positive change. So I just got to thank you all and thank the Atlanta ABC for inviting us off and giving us a chance to talk with everybody today. So thank you.
Awesome. We're honored to have you. Everyone, David will send a couple links out, but again, if you have a local chapter near you, I would encourage you to jump in and join it and get involved. And again, that's just the way that this really helps start from the top at the umbrella down to the local level. So on behalf of the Atlanta ABC, everyone who's still on here, I appreciate it. Thank you. And y'all have a great rest of the day.